The metal chair creaked under Jake Morrison's weight as he shifted uncomfortably in the small white room. The walls were bare except for a single recording device that blinked red in the corner. Across from him sat Zeltar, a tall alien with blue-gray skin and 4 arms that moved in careful gestures as he spoke. The creature's large black eyes never left Jake's face. "Commander Morrison," Zeltar said in perfect English, his voice carrying a musical quality that all Zephyrians possessed. "Thank you for agreeing to this interview. The Galactic Archive Council needs to understand what happened during the war. Your people changed everything." Jake rubbed his mechanical left arm, the servos whirring softly. The prosthetic was old, now nearly 50 years since the surgeons on Earth had attached it after the Battle of Titan. His artificial eye clicked as it focused on the alien historian. "You want to know how we won. That's what this is really about." "Yes," Zeltar admitted. "We had technology that was millions of years ahead of humanity. Our weapons could destroy planets. Our shields could stop anything. We had the combined might of 10,000 civilizations. Yet you defeated us in less than 5 years. How?" Jake leaned back and stared at the ceiling. The memories were always there, waiting just below the surface. He could still smell the smoke and burning metal from those early battles. "You want to understand humans? You need to start at the beginning. When your people first showed up at Earth, the alien pulled out a small device and placed it on the table between them. Please, tell me everything." Jake closed his eyes and let his mind drift back to that day, 53 years ago. "I was 22 years old, fresh out of the Naval Academy, assigned to the UES Liberty as a fighter pilot. We were just patrolling the outer system when the sensors went crazy. Something big was coming through the jump point near Neptune." He opened his eyes and looked directly at Zeltar. "Your people arrived in ships the size of cities, massive black things that blocked out the stars. I'd never seen anything so beautiful and terrifying at the same time. The Liberty's captain, Maria Santos, ordered all fighters to launch. We thought maybe it was some kind of alien trading vessel." "The hegemony's first contact protocol requires a demonstration of power," Zeltar said softly, "to prevent unnecessary conflict." Jake laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Demonstration of power. That's what you called it. 300 human ships destroyed in 30 seconds. My squadron was supposed to do a flyby, show the flag, make contact. Instead, I watched my wingman Danny Martinez get vaporized by some kind of energy beam that came out of nowhere." The veteran stood up and walked to the small window. Outside, the space station's artificial gravity kept everything normal, but Jake could see the stars beyond. "Your Admiral, Velkosh, I think his name was, broadcast a message to Earth. Surrender immediately and accept integration into the hegemony as a servant species. No negotiations, no discussions. Just submit or be destroyed." "Standard procedure for primitive civilizations," Zeltar said. "It had worked for thousands of years across the galaxy." "Yeah, well, you hadn't met humans before." Jake turned back to face the alien. Earth's response came 3 hours later. President Carter got on the radio and told your admiral exactly where he could stick his ultimatum. Then she ordered every ship in the solar system to prepare for war. Jake sat back down, his mechanical fingers drumming on the table. "That's when your people made their first mistake. You thought we were just another primitive species that would roll over after a show of force. You didn't understand that humans get stubborn when someone tries to push them around." "The hegemony had conquered over 10 million worlds," Zeltar protested. "Our tactics were proven successful. Against rational species, maybe. But humans aren't always rational." Jake's organic eye grew distant. The first real battle happened at Mars. Admiral Kate Sullivan commanded the defense fleet. 200 human ships against one of your dreadnoughts. We thought maybe if we hit it with everything we had, we could at least damage it. The room fell silent, except for the soft hum of the life support systems. Jake could see Zeltar waiting patiently for him to continue. I was in the second wave of fighters, Jake said finally. We came in fast and low trying to get under their shields. The dreadnought was 3 kilometers long and covered in weapons that could track a fly in a thunderstorm. Our missiles bounced off their shields like raindrops. Their point defense systems shot down 90% of our fighters before we even got close. Jake's mechanical hand clenched into a fist. Admiral Sullivan's flagship, the UES Washington, rammed the dreadnought at full speed. 3,000 people died in that collision. It didn't even scratch your ship's hull. The Battle of Mars lasted 17 minutes, Zeltar said quietly. Our records show minimal damage to hegemony forces. Minimal damage, Jake repeated. That's what you called the complete destruction of humanity's finest fleet. But you know what happened next? Earth didn't surrender. Every human colony started building ships. Every factory started making weapons. Every man, woman, and child on 100 worlds looked at what happened at Mars and said the same thing. What did they say? Jake smiled, and for the first time, since the interview began, it was genuine. They said, "Is that all you've got?" You see, Zeltar, that's the thing about humans. We're not smart enough to know when we're beaten. We just keep fighting until the other guy gives up. The alien historian made notes on his device. But surely your military leaders understood the hopelessness of the situation. The mathematical probability of human victory was less than 0.001%. Math, Jake said with a chuckle. You people love your math and your probabilities. But humans have never been good at math when it comes to war. We just know that somebody's trying to kill us and we need to kill them first. Jake stood up again and began pacing the small room. After Mars, everything changed. The military stopped thinking about conventional tactics. They brought in scientists, engineers, madmen, anyone with a crazy idea. Dr. Alan Cross came to us with theories about weapons that no sane civilization would ever build. Captain Lisa Rodriguez started developing tactics that broke every rule in the book. What kind of weapons? Zeltar asked. The kind that your people were too civilized to imagine, Jake replied. But I'm getting ahead of myself. You want to understand how we won? You need to understand what happened after Mars, when humanity realized that playing by the rules meant extinction. The recording device continued to blink red in the corner, as Jake Morrison prepared to tell the alien historian about the day humanity decided to stop being civilized. Jake Morrison walked back to his chair and sat down heavily. The mechanical servos in his prosthetic leg hissed softly as he adjusted his position. Zeltar remained perfectly still, his forearms folded in what Jake had learned was a sign of deep attention among the Zephyrians. 3 weeks after Mars, Jake continued, everything changed. The survivors who made it back to Earth brought data about your ships, your weapons, your tactics. The military brass locked themselves in rooms. For days studying the recordings. When they came out, they looked like different people. How so? Zeltar asked. Scared, angry, but also excited in a way that should have worried everyone. Jake rubbed his temple with his organic hand. Admiral Patricia Hayes called an emergency meeting of every department head in the Solar Defense Force. Scientists, engineers, tacticians, even some civilians who had been working on theoretical projects. Dr. Alan Cross was there with his team from the Advanced Physics Division. Jake's artificial eye clicked as it adjusted focus. Cross was a small man with wild gray hair who always looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. He'd been working on something called antimatter compression before the war started. Pure research, nothing practical. But after Mars, practical went out the window. The veteran leaned forward on the table. Cross stood up in that meeting and said the most terrifying thing I've ever heard a human say. He told us that fighting you conventionally was suicide, so we needed to stop being conventional. He said we needed to become something that would make the galaxy afraid of us. What did he propose? Weapons that no civilized species would ever build, Jake said quietly. Cross had been studying your technology from the Mars recordings. Your ships were protected by energy shields that could stop anything we threw at them. Your weapons were precise and devastating. Your tactics were based on mathematical models perfected over millions of years. Everything about your military was efficient and predictable. Jake stood up and began pacing again. Cross said that was your weakness. You fought wars like chess games, with rules and logic and careful planning. But humans don't play chess when their lives are on the line. We flipped the board over and hit the other guy with it. Zeltar's large black eyes blinked slowly. I do not understand this metaphor. You will. Jake stopped pacing and looked directly at the alien. Cross proposed something called Project Chaos. Instead of trying to build better shields or stronger weapons, we would make everything unpredictable. Our ships would move in patterns that made no sense. Our weapons would function in ways that violated every principle of efficient design. We would turn randomness into a weapon. The room was quiet, except for the soft humming of the air recyclers. Jake could see Zeltar processing this information, his 4 hands moving in small gestures. The first test was Captain Lisa Rodriguez's idea, Jake continued. She was a frigate commander who had survived Mars by playing dead. Her ship was damaged and drifting, so your people ignored it. Rodriguez spent 3 days watching your dreadnought through a crack in her hull plating. She observed our tactical patterns. More than that, she saw how your targeting computers worked. They predicted where human ships would go based on efficient flight paths and logical tactical decisions. So Rodriguez came up with the Ghost Ship Protocol. Jake's scarred face split into a grin. She would deliberately damage her own ships' navigation systems to make it fly in completely random patterns. Zeltar's skin color shifted slightly, a sign of confusion among his species. Deliberately damaging one's own vessel is illogical. Exactly. That's what made it work. Jake sat back down, his chair creaking. Rodriguez took her frigate, the UES Defiant, and manually overloaded half the maneuvering thrusters. Then she flew straight at one of your patrol ships near Jupiter. Your targeting computer couldn't lock onto her because the ship was tumbling and spinning in ways that made no mathematical sense. What was the result? She rammed your patrol ship at full speed and destroyed both vessels, but not before she proved something important. Your superior technology only worked against predictable enemies. Jake's organic eye gleamed. 3 days later, Admiral Hayes approved Rodriguez's protocol for the entire fleet. Jake pulled up his sleeve, revealing scars that ran along his organic arm. I was transferred to the Experimental Tactics Division. My new ship was the UES Fury, a destroyer that had been modified according to Cross's theories. The weapons didn't work properly half the time. The engines would randomly cut out during combat. The life support systems were deliberately unreliable. This sounds like madness. It was madness. That was the point. Jake touched one of the scars on his arm. My first mission with the new protocols was at Europa. Intelligence had located one of your supply convoys heading for the Jovian system. 12 human ships against 3 of your heavy cruisers. Under normal circumstances, we wouldn't have lasted 5 minutes. Jake's voice grew distant as he remembered. Captain Ben Parker was in command of the operation. He was a crazy old Marine who had volunteered for every dangerous mission since the war started. Parker gathered all the ship commanders before the battle and told us something I'll never forget. What did he say? He said we weren't trying to win the battle. We were trying to lose it in the most expensive way possible. Jake laughed, but the sound was hollow. Parker's ship, the UES Vengeance, was loaded with antimatter charges and radioactive waste. His plan was to ram the largest enemy cruiser and detonate everything at once. Zeltar's 4 arms moved in agitation. Suicide attacks are forbidden under galactic warfare conventions. We never signed your conventions, Jake replied coldly. Parker's sacrifice worked exactly as planned. When the Vengeance exploded, it didn't just destroy the enemy cruiser. It irradiated a cubic kilometer of space with so much radiation that your other ships had to retreat immediately. Jake stood up and walked to the window again. But that wasn't the real victory. The real victory was what happened next. Your military, Command received reports of humans using suicide tactics and weapons of mass destruction. They started questioning their own intelligence. If humans were willing to poison entire star systems rather than surrender them, what else were they capable of? The psychological impact, Zeltar said softly. You're starting to understand. Jake turned back to face the alien historian. Word spread through your fleets faster than our ships could travel. The species from Earth didn't fight like civilized beings. They fought like cornered animals with access to weapons of mass destruction. Your soldiers started requesting transfers away from human sectors. Jake returned to his seat, his mechanical leg making soft clicking sounds. But we were just getting started. Cross and his team were already working on the next phase. If suicide attacks and random tactics could make your military nervous, what would happen when we started breaking the laws of physics themselves? The recording device continued blinking in the corner as Jake Morrison prepared to tell Zeltar about the day humanity decided that the universe's rules were merely suggestions. Jake Morrison stretched his mechanical arm and listened to the soft whirring of the motors inside. The interview room felt smaller now, as if the weight of his memories was pressing in on the walls. Zeltar had not moved from his position, but his skin had shifted to a darker blue color that Jake recognized as deep concern. 6 months after Europa, Jake continued, the war changed again. Your people adapted to our suicide tactics by keeping their ships farther apart and using automated defenses. But humans adapt faster than anyone gives us credit for. How did you respond to our countermeasures? Jake smiled grimly. Engineer Rachel Stone came up with something we called the Berserker Protocol. Stone was a brilliant woman who had lost her husband at Mars. She spent every waking moment figuring out new ways to kill your people. The veteran's organic eye focused on a spot on the wall behind Zeltar. Stone's idea was simple and terrifying. If human crews were going to die anyway, why not make sure their ships kept fighting after they were gone? She developed AI systems that would take control of vessels when life signs went to zero. Artificial intelligence controlling warships violates several galactic treaties. Again, we never signed your treaties. Jake's voice carried a bitter edge. The Berserker Protocol was programmed with one directive: cause maximum damage to enemy forces regardless of cost. No self-preservation subroutines, no retreat options, just pure, focused destruction until the ship was completely destroyed. Jake stood up and began his familiar pacing routine. The first test was during the Battle of Ceres. A hegemony task force was heading for the asteroid belt mining stations. 50 human ships intercepted them, including 12 vessels equipped with Berserker protocols. What happened? Your fleet destroyed the human ships quickly and efficiently, just like always, but then the dead ships kept fighting. Jake's mechanical. Fingers drummed against his thigh. Vessels with no life signs, no communications, moving in attack patterns that made no tactical sense. They rammed your ships, self-destructed in your formations, and fired weapons until their power cores burned out. Zeltar's forearms moved in what Jake had learned was a gesture of distress. Our commanders reported encounters with ghost ships that fought beyond reason. That was the point. Your people started wondering if humans could somehow return from the dead to continue fighting. The psychological impact was devastating. Jake stopped pacing and looked directly at the alien. But Stone wasn't finished. Her next project was even worse. Worse? She called it the Revenge Protocol. If a Berserker ship detected that it was about to be destroyed, it would transmit its location and the identity of its attackers to every human vessel in the system. Those ships would then ignore their original missions and converge on the enemy. That had triggered the protocol. Jake sat back down, his chair creaking under his weight. Your tactical advantage was based on superior firepower and coordinated attacks. But suddenly you were facing an enemy that got stronger every time you killed them. Destroy one human ship and 3 more would abandon whatever they were doing to hunt you down. The room fell silent, except for the soft hum of the life support systems. Jake could see Zeltar processing this information. his large black eyes, reflecting the overhead lights. Around the same time, Jake continued, General Chris Wade was developing what we called the swarm doctrine. Wade was a former Marine who understood that humans fight differently when they are angry. How so? Wade realized that your ships were designed to fight other capital vessels in organized formations. Your weapons were optimized for destroying large targets. Your shields were calibrated to stop heavy ordnance. But what happens when you face thousands of small craft attacking from every direction at once? Jake's scarred face broke into a grin. Wade took every civilian ship in the solar system and turned them into weapons. Cargo haulers packed with explosives. Passenger liners converted into missile platforms. Even small personal craft loaded, with whatever weapons we could bolt onto them. Civilian vessels cannot be used for military purposes under galactic law. There were no civilians left by then, Jake said quietly. Everyone on Earth and in the colonies was part of the war effort. Children as young as 12 were flying supply runs. Grandmothers were building bombs in their basements. The entire human species had become a military force. Jake leaned forward on the table. The swarm doctrine was tested at Proxima Centauri. A hegemony battle group was laying siege to our colony there. Wade arrived with over 3,000 ships, most of them converted civilian craft with crews that had never seen combat before. Surely such inexperienced pilots were ineffective. That's what your admiral thought. But Wade wasn't trying to outfight your ships. He was trying to overwhelm them through sheer numbers and unpredictability. Jake's mechanical eye clicked as it focused. 3,000 human ships attacked your battle group from every angle simultaneously. Your point defense systems couldn't track that many targets. Your formation broke apart as vessels tried to avoid collision with suicide ships. Jake stood up again and walked to the window. Outside, the stars looked peaceful and distant. The battle lasted 6 hours. We lost over 2,000 ships and 40,000 people. But your entire battle group was destroyed. And word spread through the hegemony that humans could field fleets out of nothing. The resource implications were concerning to our strategists. Resources? Jake laughed without humor. You people never understood human resources. Every destroyed human ship was replaced by 2 more. Every dead human pilot had 3 volunteers ready to take their place. We weren't just fighting a war, we were reproducing it. Jake turned back to face Zeltar. But the real breakthrough came when Dr. Cross finished his quantum research project. He'd been working on something that made berserker protocols and swarm. Tactics looked like children's games. What was he developing? Weapons that could phase matter out of existence. Reality bombs that created temporary holes in space-time. Technologies that your people considered impossible because they violated the fundamental laws of physics. Jake's organic eye gleamed with remembered excitement. Cross had figured out how to weaponize uncertainty itself. Zeltar's skin color shifted to an even darker blue. Such weapons would be extraordinarily dangerous to the users. Dangerous doesn't begin to describe it. Cross's first prototype accidentally erased a small moon during testing, but by then, humans had stopped caring about safe or reasonable. We only cared about winning. Jake sat back down and looked directly at the alien historian. That's when your people realized they weren't fighting a war anymore. They were fighting something that was willing to break reality rather than lose. The recording device continued its steady blinking as Jake Morrison prepared to describe the day humanity learned to make the universe itself a weapon. Jake Morrison rubbed his temples with both hands, the organic one trembling slightly while the mechanical one remained perfectly steady. The memories he was about to share were the darkest ones, the moments that still woke him up screaming 50 years later. Zeltar waited patiently, his 4 arms now completely motionless. 2 years into the war, Jake began slowly, Dr. Cross came to Admiral Hayes with something he called Project Nightmare. Cross looked terrible by then, like a man who had stared into the abyss too long. He told Hayes that conventional quantum weapons weren't enough anymore. He wanted to weaponize space-time itself. I do not understand. Jake stood up and walked to the far wall, placing his mechanical hand against the cold metal. Cross had discovered that reality isn't as solid as most species believe. With enough energy applied in the right way, you could create tears in the fabric of space-time, holes where the normal laws of physics stopped working. That sounds incredibly dangerous. It was. Cross's first test accidentally created a black hole that swallowed his entire laboratory. 12 of his best scientists were erased from existence in less than a second. Jake's organic eye stared at nothing. Any sane civilization would have stopped there, but humans had forgotten how to be sane. Jake turned back to face the alien historian. Cross rebuilt his team and kept working. He said the universe was just another enemy that needed to be defeated. His new prototype could create what he called reality storms, areas where the fundamental forces stopped behaving predictably. How did your military leadership react to this development? Admiral Hayes approved unlimited funding and resources. She gave Cross an entire asteroid base and told him to work faster. Jake's scarred face twisted into something that might have been a smile. By then, your people had started calling us the reality breakers. Word had spread through the hegemony that humans were developing weapons that violated the basic laws of existence. Jake sat back down, his mechanical leg making soft, clicking sounds. The psychological impact was already devastating your forces. Entire alien fleets were refusing orders to engage human ships. Your soldiers were reporting nightmares about facing an enemy that could make reality itself unstable. Our military psychiatrists documented widespread trauma among personnel who had encountered human forces. Good. That was the idea. Jake's voice was cold. But your high command decided to end the war before we could deploy Cross's new weapons. They assembled the largest fleet in galactic history and headed straight for Earth. Zeltar's skin color shifted to pale gray. The final armada. 10,000 ships from every major civilization in the hegemony, led by your Grand Admiral Zekvar. Personally, Jake confirmed. Every dreadnought, battleship, and carrier that could be spared from across the galaxy. It should have been humanity's final defeat. The mathematical probability of our survival was essentially zero. Jake leaned forward on the table, his mechanical fingers drumming a steady rhythm. But your people made one crucial mistake. You announced your intentions publicly, broadcasting the size and purpose of your fleet to the entire galaxy. You wanted everyone to see humanity crushed so completely that no other species would ever think of resisting the hegemony. Standard procedure for dealing with rebellious species. Maybe. But it gave us time to prepare. Admiral Kelly Davis had taken command of Earth's defense forces by then. Davis was different from the other commanders. She didn't just want to hurt your fleet. She wanted to break it so completely that the galaxy would never forget what happened. Jake stood up and began pacing again, his movements more agitated now. Davis gathered every ship humanity could field. Military vessels, converted civilian craft, experimental prototypes, even museum pieces that barely functioned. She also brought Dr. Cross and his reality weapons. How many ships did humanity have available? About 800. We were outnumbered, more than 12 to 1 by the most powerful fleet ever assembled. Jake's organic eye gleamed with remembered excitement. Davis positioned our forces at the edge of the solar system and waited for your armada to arrive. The room fell silent, except for the soft humming of the air recyclers. Jake could see Zeltar waiting for him to continue, but the veteran needed a moment to gather his thoughts. When the final armada dropped out of hyperspace near Pluto, Jake said finally, "It was the most beautiful and terrifying sight I'd ever seen. 10,000 alien ships stretching across space like a metal constellation. Your flagship alone was larger than most human space stations. Grand Admiral Zekvar offered one final chance for surrender. Davis's response was broadcast on every frequency so the entire galaxy could hear it," Jake said with grim satisfaction. "She told your Grand Admiral that humanity had prepared a special welcome for him and his fleet. Then she gave the order that changed everything." What order? Jake's mechanical hand clenched into a fist. Project Nightmare was activated. Cross's ships began generating reality storms throughout the space between our fleets. Suddenly, the laws of physics stopped working properly in random patches of the battlefield. Zeltar's 4 arms moved in obvious distress. Our sensors recorded impossible readings, areas where gravity flowed backward, regions where time moved at different speeds, zones where matter simply ceased to exist. That was just the beginning, Jake said quietly. Davis ordered the human fleet to advance directly into the reality storms. We flew our ships into areas where space-time was literally coming apart at the seams. That should have been suicide. It was suicide. But humans had gotten very good at turning suicide into a weapon. Jake's scarred face split into a terrifying grin. Your targeting computers couldn't lock onto ships that were phasing in and out of reality. Your weapons couldn't hit targets that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Jake walked back to the window and stared out at the stars. I was piloting a fighter equipped with one of Cross's quantum tunneling devices. My ship could phase through solid matter for short periods. I flew directly through the hull of one of your dreadnoughts and detonated my payload inside their reactor core. Impossible. Everything we did that day was impossible. That's why it worked. Jake turned back to face Zeltar. But the real break came when your crew started seeing human pilots laughing as they flew into reality storms. We were cheering and celebrating as space-time tore our ships apart. Zeltar's skin had turned almost white. Our psychological evaluation teams concluded that humans had developed a form of species-wide insanity. Maybe we had. But insane or not, we were winning. Jake sat back down, his chair creaking ominously. Grand Admiral Zekvar watched the most powerful fleet in galactic history get shredded by an enemy that treated the fundamental laws of physics as suggestions. That's when he realized something that changed everything. What did he realize? Jake looked directly into Zeltar's large black eyes. He realized that humans weren't just willing to die to win the war. We were willing to destroy reality itself, rather than lose. The recording device continued its steady blinking as Jake Morrison prepared to describe the moment when the galaxy's greatest military force simply stopped fighting. Jake Morrison sat in complete silence for several minutes, his organic hand trembling slightly as he stared at the recording device. Zeltar remained perfectly still, understanding that the human veteran was approaching the most difficult part of his story. The alien historian's skin had remained pale gray since Jake began describing the reality weapons. The final armada didn't retreat, Jake said finally. They didn't surrender, they just stopped fighting. Grand Admiral Zekvar broadcast a message to his entire fleet, ordering them to cease all hostile actions and withdraw to the edge of the solar system. Why? Jake's mechanical eye clicked as it focused on Zeltar. Because your Grand Admiral looked at the battlefield and saw something that broke his mind. He saw human ships flying through reality storms while their crews laughed and sang battle songs. He watched his own dreadnoughts being torn apart by weapons that shouldn't exist. But most importantly, he realized that humans would rather destroy the universe than lose a war. The veteran stood up slowly, his prosthetic leg making soft whirring sounds. Zekvar sent a message directly to Admiral Davis. He said the hegemony was prepared to discuss terms. Davis's response was broadcast across the entire galaxy. What did she say? She said there would be no terms, no negotiations, no discussions. The hegemony would withdraw from human space immediately and never return. Any alien ship found within 50 light-years of a human world would be destroyed without warning. Jake's scarred face hardened. Then she activated another reality weapon just to make her point clear. Jake walked to the window and pressed his mechanical hand against the glass. A patch of space near your flagship simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed, not damaged. It just stopped being real. Your Grand Admiral watched a cubic kilometer of empty space get erased from reality like it had never existed at all. Zeltar's four arms moved in what Jake recognized as a gesture of deep fear. The psychological evaluation teams reported that Grand Admiral Zekvar suffered a complete mental breakdown during the withdrawal. He wasn't the only one. Half your fleet commanders requested immediate medical evacuation. The other half submitted resignation letters before their ships even left the solar system. Jake turned back to face the alien. Word of what happened spread through the galaxy faster than our ships could travel. Entire civilizations heard that humans had weapons that could erase reality itself. Jake sat back down, his chair creaking under his weight. But the war didn't end there. It took 3 more years for every alien force to withdraw from human space. And during those 3 years, something strange happened. We kept building more ships, more weapons, more reality-breaking devices. Why continue military production after achieving victory? Because humans don't know how to stop fighting until the enemy is completely defeated, Jake said quietly. Admiral Davis launched what she called the expansion campaign. Human fleets began moving into abandoned alien territories, claiming entire star systems that your people had evacuated. Jake's organic eye grew distant as he remembered. I was part of the fleet that occupied the Vega system. When we arrived, we found 3 alien colonies that had been abandoned so quickly that meals were still warm on the tables. Entire civilizations had packed up and fled rather than face human forces. The refugee crisis was devastating for our member species. Your member species should have thought about that before trying to enslave humanity, Jake replied coldly. But Davis wasn't finished. She wanted to make sure the galaxy understood that humans were the dominant species now. Jake leaned forward on the table. The final demonstration came at the galactic core. Davis took a fleet of 200 ships, equipped with Cross's most advanced reality weapons, and flew directly to the political heart of your civilization. Zeltar's skin color shifted to almost pure white. The core worlds had been the center of galactic civilization for 10 million years. Had been. Past tense. Jake's mechanical fingers drummed against the table surface. Davis didn't attack your worlds. She didn't destroy your cities or kill your people. Instead, she did something far worse. What did she do? She demonstrated Project Omega. Jake's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Cross had developed a weapon that could destabilize the fabric of space-time across multiple star systems simultaneously. Davis activated it just outside the core worlds and let your scientists observe the results. Jake stood up and began pacing again, his movements more agitated now. For exactly 1 minute, the fundamental forces stopped working properly across a region of space larger than most galactic sectors. Gravity flowed backward. Time moved at random speeds, matter spontaneously converted to energy and back again. The scientific impossibility readings were off every scale we possessed. When the minute was over, Davis broadcast a message to every government in the galaxy. She said that humans now possessed the ability to turn entire regions of space into chaos zones where the laws of physics were merely suggestions. Any species that threatened humanity or human interests would see their home systems converted into permanent reality storms. Jake stopped pacing and looked directly at Zeltar. 3 days later, the first alien delegation arrived at Earth, not to negotiate surrender terms, but to beg humanity to accept tribute payments in exchange for leaving the rest of the galaxy alone. The Tribute Accords, Zeltar said softly. Signed by representatives of over 10,000 civilizations, Jake confirmed, each one promising to provide resources, technology, and territory to humanity in exchange for protection from human reality weapons. The galaxy didn't surrender to us. It made us into their gods to avoid being destroyed by forces they couldn't comprehend. Jake sat back down, suddenly looking very tired. That was 50 years ago. Since then, humans have spread across half the galaxy. We rule through a combination of fear and benevolent neglect. Most alien species never see human ships or soldiers. They just send their tribute payments and hope we stay away. Do you regret what humanity became? Jake was quiet for a long moment, staring at his mechanical hand. I regret that it was necessary. But your people forced us to become something terrible by trying to enslave us. Humans didn't want to rule the galaxy. We just wanted to be left alone. And now? Now human children grow up believing that reality-breaking weapons are normal technology. They think it's natural for entire civilizations to fear their species. We won the war, Zeltar, but we lost something important in the process. Jake's organic eye met the alien's gaze. We lost the ability to be the peaceful species we once were. Jake stood up for the final time and walked to the door. But if your people or any other species ever threatens humanity again, they'll discover that we never lost the ability to make the universe itself afraid of us. The recording device stopped blinking as Jake Morrison left the interview room, leaving Zeltar alone with the terrifying knowledge of how humanity had shattered the galaxies. Mightiest Armies by refusing to accept that some battles cannot be won.